was 11. So my dad had a stroke, a blood clot that went into his brain. Science does translate into meaningful changes in healthcare for people.
That's really incredible. So you guys are basically fixing problems in your childhood.
Connectome is basically a lifelong monitoring routine for your brain.
Final answer?
No.
Can you test if you actually love someone really? They're like, oh, your blood flow is not there.
Dangerous.
What are the kind of, flow of blood, which is unique to you and then unique to your lifestyle as well? So looking at that blood flow, what we can start doing is tracking.
Co-founder search experience, but it is the strangest thing you can imagine, and really was one of the big lessons for me, and I really learned a lot from it because Rufus was like the 20th person.
Is broccoli good for the brain?
Broccoli's got lots of great vitamins,
Yeah.
and I think some of those are...
I just had a question about the ethical concerns. I know some people are a bit icky about tracking and, my data. How do you think you're going to tackle that?
Hey guys, welcome to the Nova and Boba podcast. My name's Amma. I am an ex-startup founder and now host of this podcast. So today I'm really excited because I have my sister as a co-host with me. She is currently doing a PhD in neuroscience at King's College London. So I thought she'd be a great addition to this podcast because we're going to be interviewing some seriously incredible science founders. Without further ado, we'll introduce our guests. They are Lucas and Rufus, they're meant to be. They're the founders of Connectome. Connectome is a revolutionary brain technology startup backed by scientists at Imperial and the University of Zurich. And they have a vision to unlock your brain's potential to help you live and perform at your best.
Lucas is a neuroscientist, health tech executive, and CEO of Connectome, featured in Forbes and The Guardian.
Rufus is the co-founder and chief scientific officer at Connectome with a PhD from Edinburgh and Imperial. His research explores memory, cognition, and AI's role in neuroscience. So thank you so much, Lucas and Rufus, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Why did you decide to build Connectome?
Yeah, cool. So, well, firstly, thanks so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be on and to have some time to talk about Connectome. Connectome is basically a lifelong monitoring routine for your brain. It's a routine brain scan that you undertake in a location close by to where you might live, which you can then use to optimize your life, improve your well-being, and prevent health issues that you might have in the future. And that brain scan then gives you deep insights into what kind of brain you have, who you are as a person, and what kind of things you might be able to do to improve your life based on the brain that you have.
Every time somebody comes in for a scan, we're essentially wanting to track what characterizes their brain right there and then within the scan. We're using a technology, first instance, called FNIS. So that's functional near infrared spectroscopy. And essentially what it does is it monitors the blood flow on the top surface of the brain, the cortex. So essentially, where blood is flowing within the brain is usually where thought is tightly coupled to thoughts and sort of neural activity. So when you come and have a scan, we're looking at where this blood is flowing over a series of a few cognitive tests and when you're at rest. And the idea is we want to build this neural fingerprint in a way. So what are the kind of, flow of blood, which is unique to you and then unique to your lifestyle as well. So looking at that blood flow, what we can start doing is tracking over time how your lifestyle is affecting the flow of blood within your brain. And a kind of good example of how blood might be dysregulated in a disease case. So in instances of like mild cognitive impairment or something like that, or dementia, you actually have something called vascular dementia, in which blood flow starts shrinking away within the cortex. And you can actually classify this quite nicely. And this isn't going to be something that's going to be like immediately part of Connectome. And there's a huge amount of regulatory hurdles that we need to get there. But we're embarking in the direction of this, is being able to track this over time and see if you're on trend for these sort of health-related instances, and see how we can help steer you and your lifestyle to a more healthy brain state.
That's interesting. So what current experiments are being done? Are you looking to do more Alzheimer's disease or just more everyday life?
Yeah, so we're very much embarking on this journey. So we're quite close to the start of it. But essentially, we're conducting 2 cohort studies at the moment at Imperial College. And here, essentially what we're looking to do is track the neural activity and the lifestyle kind of profile that goes with that neural activity over time and see how it changes across individuals and see how robust the biomarkers are with FNIS to see if we can actually use it as a way of showing these trends. So we're looking at a few different areas of the brain. We're looking at where the blood is flowing. We're looking at how different brain regions are connected to each other. And then we're also interested in the overall dynamics of blood flow within the brain. And then we're also taking a step back and thinking, how can we enhance this technology? FNIS is a technology. Some of its shortfalls are the fact that it can struggle a little bit with pigment in skin, and it can also struggle with different hair types. So we're trying to look into the equity of the device. So we're running this study at the University of Zurich to see the effects of hair on blood flow within the brain, to see if we can just cancel it out. And that way we can make this device more equitable and open to everybody that wants to use it, essentially.
So for this study at Imperial, or the studies in general, are you recruiting at the moment?
We're recruiting over the next few weeks, actually.
Nice.
And we're going to be starting the study from late February and going all the way through to July.
Oh, wow.
So if you want to join the
Yeah.
study, then please do sign up to our waitlist, because we'd love to have as many people as possible.
So how does that work? So you sign up to the study. The people aren't there till summer from February. How does it work? Do they come in once a month or a couple of times a month?
So basically what we'll do is, if you sign up to our waitlist, then we'll be in contact with you,
Right.
and then we'll give you a full overview of what being enrolled actually means.
Yeah, exciting. So is it like a helmet, or do they stick those things? I'm just thinking what it
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah, headset is probably a better word than
headset.
helmet. Like you said, basically, yeah, it's a hard shell form factor helmet, which is basically full of sensors that are looking into your brain. And you put it on. It's that simple. And then basically what we do is we put you through a series of activities which are then designed to stimulate and stretch your brain, so that we're testing essentially, or we're observing what your brain does under different conditions in order to figure out what kind of brain exactly you have. Yeah, and some of those tests can be like fun, like in one we ask you to think about somebody that you love, and some of them can be quite tricky. It's like doing a puzzle or trying to remember things that were like 3 or 4 stages back. That's the kind of thing that we do. Yeah.
So if you're thinking about someone you love, like what sort of blood flow is happening in the brain?
Everyone is different, right?
Okay, first. Or could they test if you actually love someone? Maybe they're like, oh, the blood flow is not there, so you don't love them. Or it just doesn't work.
Dangerous.
Like that.
I'm not sure we're there yet in terms of this kind of insight into the brain. Like emotions such as that are very complex. There are some really interesting signatures that we can look into though, regarding what kind of brain you have and what kind of thinker you are, and like how your memory works and what you're strong at and what you might be weaker at.
In terms of people, let's say, who have ADHD, is there something, would you be able to track that with the headset sort of thing?
So what we can actually do using this technology is actually look into some of those attributes that might contribute to ADHD.
Yeah.
So what we're not doing is diagnosing ADHD, and the one thing that I would say is definitely never don't go and see a medical professional and get a proper diagnosis. But what we are able to do, and what's really on the roadmap for us, is being able to look at some of those underlying factors that contribute to ADHD. So what are the kind of things that your brain might be doing that might contribute to you having an attention deficit, or the kind of things that might contribute to you struggling with focus, struggling with stick-with-itness is the word they use. Do you have those attributes in your brain that might be resulting in that? We can definitely look at those things, and that's one of the things that we'll be doing in the first version of the product.
I'd also just add on to that and say that the way that Connectome is approaching this is trying to provide information to individuals from a brain-centric perspective. So there's a lot of healthcare companies out there, a lot of wearable companies that give you information in different ways, but we're very much putting the brain at the center of this. So it's a case of understanding how your lifestyle is impacting your brain activity and trying to really make that correlation, that pairing of one to the next.
Yeah, feel free to go really dig into that. What's happening when they scan your brain? What are these insights? Like, how can I use these insights to improve my life or focus or mental performance or whatever?
The way that I'd say starting to think about it is a little bit like heart rate variability. And so heart rate variability, it's a great thing in the sense that you can see that if you've got increased variability, it might be that you're more stressed, that your sleep performance is lower. So it's a way of indicating that you need to make a change within your life and that your heart's telling you this, but in your brain, we're trying to make that connection between what in your life is improving your brain health.
We're basically then using that to infer insights on things like personality, attention and focus, memory, and then aging as well. And so you can imagine that when we look at those, we're basically building a picture of you. And what we do is then correlate that with the metrics that Rufus was just talking about around lifestyle. And the idea is that basically, our long game is that we want to be able to provide people with the best possible answer to how I can be better.
Nice.
So that they can manage it themselves based on people that are similar to themselves, right? Because we think that the way that we currently comprehend the brain is very crude, and we'd love to provide people with the information that they have so that they can live the best life possible.
We really want to dig into your stories, like who's behind the founder. And I got this question from the Jay Shetty podcast, and it's who were you as a child that may have influenced why you do what you do today? So I'd love to ask you both this question.
This is where we find out how strange you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, as a child, I was really pensive, actually, and I was really preoccupied by some of the big questions about things like what is consciousness, or what are we? And I think if you spoke to honestly, if you spoke to my mother, she'd say it was really like you were a strange child because you would just sit and think often and then ask these really weird questions. That's actually the reason why I went to study neuroscience, because I wanted to understand more about what we're seeing when we're watching this movie reel that is life and where that comes from. And that's one of the things that really got me into neuroscience in the first place. And then eventually one of the reasons why I ended up, founding Connectome as well. It's this kind of desire to really understand ourselves and our brains better, which I'm really driven by, and then using that knowledge to live our lives better as well. That's one of the motivations behind what we do.
And why were you so fascinated about the bigger questions? What was so fascinating for you?
I tell you, as a child, I always had this kind of sense that I was a bit different to other people. And I think that's one of the things that left me questioning what that was about. I think as I got older, I realized that I was basically neurodivergent, or I had a kind of like slightly different brain to a lot of people. And it left me asking these questions about myself all the time, and also about other people. Like, why are people like this? Why do people think like that? Why are people good at things and why are people bad at things? And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I was seen to be like a deep child, because I was asking questions that other people weren't asking. And that kind of showed up in different ways throughout my life until as I was a bit older, I finally got my diagnosis or whatever with ADHD as a neurodivergent person. And that's really helped me to understand who I am and how I do things. I think that's one of the reasons why I was like that as a kid,
That's really cool. Yeah. And Rufus, as a child, was there anything that pointed to you being a neurotech founder in the future?
When I was 11, so my dad had a stroke, blood clot that went into his brain, and he lost all of the movement on the left side of his body, and so was paralyzed, and then had this recovery journey coming back from that. And from a really young age, I was in a hospital and surrounded by neurologists and asking what has happened and trying to understand. And I think I grew this huge appreciation for what they're doing and how they're helping. You can really see the impact that people that know about neuroscience, how they can actually help someone recover and go on that journey back to a normal life. And I think that kind of started things off in a way, is just having that access. And I very early on wanted to be a doctor. And then through doing sort of healthcare experience, I realized that it was actually less the kind of the interaction of it, but more the kind of what's going on in the first place and how can you mitigate against these things. And a really nice example I like to refer to a lot is the use of wearable tech these days. I've got a growing number of friends that are telling me about either themselves or their family that are having these instances where they're wearing a wearable that's tracking their heart rate, and then they're being told, oh, you have atrial fibrillation.
What's atrial fibrillation? Just for people that don't know.
Yeah, atrial fibrillation is essentially where you have the atrium in your heart. A part of your heart is beating incorrectly, And when the heart's beating out of pattern, it increases your chances of getting blood clots.
Yeah.
And so when you have blood clots in your bloodstream, and then one day it dislodges and it can go up into your brain and it can cause a stroke. And essentially what wearables are able to do these days is tell you have atrial fibrillation, you can report that to a doctor, and then the doctor will then say, let's put you on a blood thinner, let's monitor this, let's even try and correct your heartbeat so that you can correct a heartbeat, you can have surgeries for that. And I've got a growing number of friends that are saying, oh yeah, my dad found out about this and they got the problem solved.
Yeah.
And that's 30 years of that person's life, which they don't have to worry with overcoming a disability like that. And that it's not just the impact on that person's life, but it's the impact on their family's life as well. That's 30 years that they've had their father there, strong and healthy, and it being this big part of their family. So seeing these kind of technologies, they're here now, and thinking, how great would that have been just 20 years ago? If that had been there and that had caught that situation, then I could be having very different interaction now. So I think that's a big part of it for me, is knowing that science does translate into meaningful changes in healthcare for people.
That's really incredible. So you guys are basically fixing problems in your childhood.
I think honestly that is what it takes to be a founder. Because you need that drive to keep you going. Right? That became super clear when we first met.
So how did you guys meet? You guys seem like really similar, but
I can take it.
Go for it.
I'd just finished my PhD. As I say, just finished. I was a year out, and I was thinking, what's the next steps? And I was interested in this area of brain health. And is there something kind of commercial in this space? And could there be a startup that I could bring these skills to fruition? And I came across Connectome, our company on WellFound. And I saw Lucas was tied to it, and I reached out to Lucas directly and said, I love the project that you're building. And it was resonating exactly with what I'd wanted to do and what I talked about friends with doing. And I just didn't quite know how I'd do it myself. And I just suddenly see right there, here's the plan.
Someone's already,
and put a lot of thought into it. So I reached out to Lucas, and Lucas is a super friendly guy. And I was essentially going to be traveling to Geneva in Switzerland with some friends. And Lucas said, I'll take the train out and meet you there. So we met, and there was like an interview, kind of get to know each other kind of lunch, where looking at each other and getting to know each other is such an important part of that. I think building a startup, it's not just that 9 till 5, it's those messages in the morning when you wake up and all the way through the day until before going to bed. I was saying to my girlfriend's parents, actually, that I say goodnight to my girlfriend, give her a kiss on the cheek, and then I turn over and say, see you in the morning, Lucas.
It's actually so true.
So it's a massive part of your life. So when you guys met, did you know this would happen, that you would be sending him like maybe a kiss on the text message?
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever been through that co-founder search experience, but it is the strangest thing you can imagine, and really was one of the big lessons for me in this startup experience was, and I really learned a lot from it, because Rufus was like the 20th person that I might have met.
20th?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I took it very seriously because I knew how much of a big deal it is. And when you're at that stage of a company, idea stage, the relationship that you have really is your major value. You don't have anything else. You just have the relationship with your co-founder. And that's really what it is. And that's how I would describe a co-founder search. It's basically like serial dating, except you are asking a mix of professional and deeply personal, invasive questions. How much money do you have? Do you plan to have children in the next 3 months? Is there something that is wrong in your life? Because these are the things you need to talk about now before they become a problem in 6 months' time when we're trying to build this company together. And then the other side of it is that you're looking for this indescribable compatibility between you and that person. Do they have something that you don't have? And also, can you trust them? And we talk about that a lot together. And it's really something that's super important to us, is that priority one in everything we do, both between each other and within our team and the people that we deal with, is always trust. We will never, ever deprioritize trust for something else. You know, the founders of Airbnb are really keen on this concept as well, but like, it will never be more important to be right than it will be to maintain our relationship. That's the kind of rule number one of the co-founder agreement. And that everything we do needs to build that trust rather than destroy it. And that's how we approach co-founders together.
Absolutely.
And I was wondering, after what made Rufus right after the 20th person? What made you feel like, this?
It's so weird. This is what I mean. It's so weird. It's like dating.
Yeah.
I knew within 25 seconds that Rufus was my co-founder. He was sat in a restaurant or whatever. I sat down. I said hello to him, and I was like, perfect. I just got the impression that I could trust this guy with my child, and that's what I needed. I needed to be able to trust him with my life, because that's literally what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm giving this guy all of my resources, all of my time, energy. I'm taking the biggest risk of my life with this guy. And I need to be able to do that with someone. And that's what I was looking for. And that's how we became co-founders. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Like that, yeah.
So what was the hardest part of getting this company off the ground?
It is true what they say, that when you're trying to do something like this, it's 9 no's and 1 yes for everything you try and do.
Yeah.
It's true. And there were days when I would be getting those no's and I'd be coming home and it would really affect me.
What sort of no's in relation to Connectome, just for a bit of context?
Not possible, science isn't there, don't believe in the commercial model, yeah, but why you, too early, endless. I go and read stories of other co-founders who have made really successful companies who literally say, all you do is hear no's and you have to keep going. Anybody, if they hear 9 no's and 1 yes, they're going to think,
is this
am I wasting my time? Like, is this the right thing to do? Because I could be doing anything right now. And that's the bit of an early stage from getting to 0 to 1. I wonder how many people we lose in that 0 to 1 stage who would be amazing operators and co-founders, because they think that listening to everyone else is what you need to do to start a company. Because in reality, it's the absolute opposite. You need to ignore what everyone is saying to you, and if you believe in it, you need to go for it. That's the hardest bit.
Yeah, I always think of what kind of startups are lost. Maybe they run out of money, or run out of conviction, or just run out of even motivation.
I'd add on to this as well and say that there's a big part of it which is being comfortable with the unknown. There's a good quote I like, which is to discover new lands, you must first lose sight of shore. And I think the idea is, if you're building something which is very novel, which is very exciting to build something novel, but you don't always need to know what that looks like when you start. Importantly, it's starting and then saying, can I start? And how can I make progress towards this goal? And as you get closer, the goal starts to appear bit by bit. So it's just a part of making that journey clearer. So I think being really comfortable in that space is exactly what you need. And I think we're both very comfortable in kind of understanding what we do and don't know and saying, okay, let's move forward. Let's find out how we can actually work with what we've got. And then what we don't know, let's move in that direction.
I know you likened this technology to Zoe Health.
Yeah, I like the comparison to Zoe, actually. What Zoe does is it uses the microbiome as an axis to understand how your body works. You might or might not know what the microbiome is. It's essentially your gut bacteria. Everyone has a profile of their gut bacteria that you can then characterize, and then you can basically use that characterization to create dietary recommendations. That's what Zoe does. Connectome is basically using the same concept or conceptual framework, but using your brain's unique fingerprint of connectivity as the axis that we're looking at in order to improve your health and well-being. So in the same way that every person has a slightly different gut bacteria, every person has a different fingerprint of their brain's connectivity. So how does your brain connect to itself? What parts of the brain are connected to which? And when do they connect to themselves and when? In some people, for example, certain networks of their brain will activate more than others. And from that, we can basically infer certain things about you. So there are 2 things we can do with that. One is that studies have shown that just the fact of providing somebody with that information, i.e., you have a slightly more active part of your brain than other people, for example, improves educational outcomes. In studies where children have been shown neuroimaging sets of their brain and have had it explained to them, they consistently achieved better educational outcomes in as a result of that. So the first thing that we're doing is helping people to understand themselves better. Then the second thing is you can then use peer-reviewed literature to provide you with science's best answer for what works for people like you.
Yeah.
So if you have a slightly active network, X or Y, then, this isn't new to the world. People have been studying this for 20, 30, 40 years. It's well established that people who have an active default mode network, for example, and struggle with focus can improve that focus if they do the following things. And they can be lifestyle interventions. It can be, you need to sleep more, you need to have less screen time, you need to time box, you need to spend more time with friends, you learn better like this, that you can then train that part of your brain using different techniques.
Just to add on to that, say that what we aim to be able to provide people is objective understanding of how these things are affecting their brain.
Yeah.
So we go a little bit above what your typical cognitive test could do. And by showing you where the blood is flowing in your brain, we are giving you that objective information. So as these neuromodulatory therapies start coming out, we want to be able to pair Connectome with that so that you can see this is exactly how it's impacting your brain and build with them. So be part of this ecosystem that helps them get to market as well.
Yes, I just had a question about the ethical concerns. I know some people are a bit icky about tracking and my data. How do you think you're going to tackle that?
From the very beginning of Connectome, this has been a question that we've been asked. So it's something that is at the absolute forefront of our thinking is how are we going to, first of all, work with data and help people understand how we're using their data and ask if they want their data to be used. So data privacy, essentially. So essentially, to build what we're trying to build and to compare people to others and to look at their brain activity, we need to work with data. So that's why we run these cohort studies, and we run those specifically to build the science around it. So our first sort of thinking is about building incredibly secure databases, which enable users to store their data, and it's completely decoupled from their identification. So we're learning from the mistakes that other companies have made. We're learning from, for example, 23andMe. So we really want to focus on security from the absolute start. The next thing is just having absolute transparency and clarity as to how we're using data, and always giving someone the option of saying, I want to opt in to using my data. I want to be part of this discovery system. And they can always say, actually, no, what? I just want to use the service. I want to see my results, and I don't want my data to be used for anything else. So I think having that clarity, transparency, and option to opt in if you want to, having that clear from the beginning is exactly what we're trying to make sure that is embedded in Connectome.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's another kind of big one, which I think is on a lot of people's minds when we talk to users. What do I do if I find something out about myself? And what we're seeing when people go through MRI scanners, which is not the technology we use, by the way, and they're worried about finding out about something bad about themselves that they can't necessarily do something about. It's a bit like the time traveler's paradox. Would you want to know if you were going to die? Would you want to know about it or not? And if there's nothing you could do about it? And our answer to that is very clear. So we're never going to look for things that we can't do anything about. We're not looking for cancer in your brain. We're not looking for changes in the structure of your brain that might infer that you have something wrong, like a growth or a tumor or something like that. There are companies that do that, and that's something that you can go and do if you want. But we're really actually looking at the connectivity of your brain. It's really about the functional connectivity of your brain and how it connects to itself.
Fantastic. All right, I think we should go to a brain myth-busting section. So I'm going to take the first ones. The first, we don't know if it's a myth or not, we would like to ask you. Alzheimer's is largely linked to genetics. What is the answer to this?
True or false, Rufus?
It's a depends answer. Alzheimer's disease is characterized by two main hallmarks. There's these proteins that build up within your neurons called tau proteins, and they create essentially a condition that destroys the neuron. And then there are these plaques that form in between neurons called amyloid plaques. So they build up over time, and it's these tiny little proteins in between your neurons that build up, and they form these larger plaques, and essentially these start to destroy the neurons over time. So this is how Alzheimer's is characterized. There are certain genes that increase the likelihood of these small proteins to be built up. There's a gene called apogene. And as they build up over time, you have a greater likelihood, essentially, of that occurring and occurring more all over your brain. So there are genes that are linked to Alzheimer's disease. At the same time, there are genes that are linked to a healthier brain.
Yeah.
There's been an amazing study done in the Netherlands, which looked at people over the age of 100 that were cognitively healthy. So they found basically a lot of these people and they said, okay, what is it that's different about your brain and your life? What was really interesting is that they didn't really have any kind of mega health interests. There were people that smoked, people that drank. I'm not saying these are good things, but for these individuals, there was something interesting. And what they found when they were looking at their sort of gene expressions, that they tended to have an upregulation in anti-neuroinflammatory genes and also the genes that help produce microtubules within the brain, so forming new neurons. Yeah. So there's good genes and there's bad genes, and it's finding that ratio within the individuals that are going to indicate their ability to have a better or worse predisposition to Alzheimer's disease.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that.
That's really interesting.
The next one is listening to classical music makes you smarter.
I really like this one, and I think it's an interesting one. Music, I think, is something that's very subjective, and it impacts your brain in many ways. Focus might be something that will help you be, quote unquote, smarter. Yes. And for some people, classical music is a great way of focusing. It's a great way of relaxing your brain and essentially getting yourself into a state in which you can perform a task more efficiently. Equally, there could be some songs which are really good for getting some adrenaline going. Ride of the Valkyries. You could have something like that gets your heart pumping, and it makes you more passionate or something like that. But point being is that there are other genres out there that people might find better. I don't just listen to Ride of the Valkyries whilst doing Connectome.
No one is convinced by that. Yeah.
No, for example, I listen to a lot of techno because I find it's something that's super rhythmic and it helps me focus a lot. And it's something that's subjective to me. And whether or not one music genre is better is completely subjective for a lot of people. And it has so many different factors as to how it might help you focus or help you be more passionate about what you're doing, get your adrenaline up, that sort of thing.
That's brilliant. So just what suits you, what music you like. So do you know that beta wavy thingy? Have you heard of that? Is that?
I saw that on TikTok that it makes you focus, and people are like, oh my god, it works, but does it work? I don't know.
Like binaural.
Binaural. Yeah.
I actually use that.
Okay, so it must work.
I mean, anecdotally works for me.
Yeah.
There is a truth in there that we can use ways of stimulating your senses to attenuate your brain waves. That is true. That is true. And binaural beats is one example of that. I think one of the kind of pieces of information we want to land is that because of generative AI and because of AI machine learning, these ways of stimulating the brain in a non-invasive way are becoming more and more available. So there are more and more ways of attenuating your brain into certain mood states, into certain ways of behaving, and binaural beats is one of them. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Cool.
That's really
cool. Is broccoli good for the brain?
Broccoli's got lots of great vitamins.
Yeah.
And I think some of those are anti-inflammatory. It's always about looking at this kind of case. I think it's always with nutrition, it's about balance. And obviously, if you eat more broccoli, it's probably going to be good for you.
Yeah.
But if you take it to another level, an extreme, only live off broccoli, it's probably not.
Yeah.
So finding that balance, and I would say that broccoli is probably pretty good for you. Yeah.
Nice.
Brilliant. Okay.
So another myth is that drinking coffee every day improves memory. Is that true or false?
I think there's a really good podcast by Andrew Huberman on coffee and other stimulants as well, their effects. So I signpost that for sure.
Shout out Andrew, please sponsor us.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, I think it can essentially affect your awakeness and help focus. And it's also one of these kind of things that people get into a habit. I think it can be very useful for focus. And also it's just nice to start a day with a coffee.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think at the same time, it's about managing caffeine dosage. So it can actually, if it's taken too much throughout the day, it can really impact a person's ability to sleep at night. So it's all about regulating it and having it when you need to avoid that situation where you're awake at night. So In terms of helping your memory, if you have it at the right times of the day, then yes, sure.
Yes.
But if you're kept awake at night, this is where a lot of memory consolidation occurs through sleeping and dreaming, then it's going to interrupt that. Then it could actually be worse for your memory. So it depends.
Nice.
And you said the
Nice.
right time of the day. I'm guessing that's like before 3 p.m. You shouldn't drink after that or something.
Yeah, I think caffeine's got a half-life around 5-6 hours.
Okay.
So 5-6 hours before
sleep.
sleeping.
Interesting.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
And the final one is that ADHD is worse when you're a child compared to when you're an adult.
I think that's a really interesting one because it's perhaps a little bit the rigidity schooling systems not necessarily being set up for neurodivergence.
Sure.
So if you are an ADHD child, you're funneled into this way of always being focused, and so it's you're much more likely to notice it. Whereas as an adult, there are industries that you can go into where ADHD is a superpower.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the worst thing to happen.
Would you say ADHD is overdiagnosed? I know some people sometimes make that comment like, oh, everyone has it. Or do you think it's more like we're realizing how common it is compared to 30 years ago?
Yeah, I think that what we are seeing an increase in diagnoses. It's also really hard for people to get a diagnosis. Like in most health systems, the waiting list for an ADHD diagnosis can go anywhere from like months to literally 10 years. I know there are places in the UK where the waiting list for an ADHD specialist is about 10 years. So it is a problem. I do think that people in general are struggling with their attention and focus. There are studies that suggest that our use of technology is correlated with that.
Yeah, it's like the fast dopamine.
And a quite interesting book called The Anxious Generation, which talks about that in detail, and the impact of technology on young people and adolescents, including attention being one of them. I think it's really complicated, and I don't think we can make statements like it's overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, or it's a very psychosocial issue, and on a societal level it's very complicated, and so I think it's definitely something that we should take a look at as a society and try and improve. And for those individuals that are curious to learn more about it, you can use Connectome and you can learn a little bit more about your brain to understand if that's something that you'd like to go and have a look at further.
You referenced the anxious generation.
How do you think like social media is contributing to like the rising levels in anxiety? A lot of people have screen times over 6 hours. Like that's probably
Standard,
good. So how do you think it's contributing to anxiety and mental illness in this generation?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, props to the author of The Anxious Generation. It's a fantastic book. I'd recommend anyone to read it. The main claims that book makes is that social media use and in general use of technology is contributing to anxiety by reducing our ability to focus on things for a long time, and also increasing our tendency towards social comparison. And that's having an effect on young people and adolescents.
There's this kind of quick dopamine that you get from social media, from a large amount of screen time, essentially. And that pulls you away from your focus. So in terms of how that relates to anxiety, if you're less focused, then you're less able to do the tasks that you're setting out to do that day. You start to underperform. But also it's something that can affect your sleep. A lot of people, they're scrolling before bed, before they're sleeping. And just that bright light can be something that stimulates your brain and help stop you from sleeping. So it starts impeding your sleep performance. And that then has a knock-on effect the next day when you're then trying to focus again. You feel more tired and you're less able to focus. So really managing that and trying to cut down for a lot of people, it's a great way of reducing anxiety.
Yeah, brilliant. Great advice. Are we getting closer to a future where you think Connectome can help us upgrade our focus? And if so, how?
Yeah.
As saying before, there's this kind of idea that we're part of a discovery drive in neuroscience. Connectome can position itself as a discovery partner for healthcare organizations, for research organizations, so that we can start looking more into depth as to what kind of characterizes ADHD and looking at it on a mass scale, because that's something that we really struggle to do in neuroscience, especially with these very bulky, expensive technologies, things like MRI machines, which cost upwards of millions of pounds. we're doing things in a very scalable way.
Yeah.
So using this new technology, we hope to be able to bring it to more people so that we can actually create more standardized data out there that can be useful to researchers. So partnering with society to actually increase our understanding of conditions like ADHD, but not just ADHD, it's understanding of memory, how we encode and recall information, understanding of stress, mood. So we really want to operate across the board and partner with society and research organizations to actually drive these multiple areas through.
Yeah, I would just add to what Rufus said, which was all perfect. Like, you know, we're really bad at understanding what might be the environmental factors that are contributing to that. And I think what Rufus said earlier was that one of the things that we don't think about when we think about a rise in ADHD diagnoses is whether the environment that these children are going through and adolescents going through might be one of the issues that we could look at more closely. They might not need to take a pharmaceutical intervention in order to deal with ADHD. And I think your question was, are we in a place where Connectome will soon be able to upgrade your focus for people like that? And in that regard, the answer is yes. What we're doing with Connectome is we're helping people to have a more nuanced understanding of what the contributing factors to their mental state might be, and then helping them to understand how to change those in a way which works for them. So we're not just looking at your brain signal, we're also looking at your lifestyle factors, your biometric data from wearables, information that you provide to us about how you feel, what you're doing, what kind of habits you have. All of that builds a picture of, okay, then based on the kind of brain and experience you have, these are the kind of adaptations that might be useful for you. That's something I'm really excited about.
You know, we were talking earlier about the effects of caffeine during your day as to when to optimize your coffee schedule, or how to manage your sleep schedule to help your focus, or when you have specific focus periods if you're better in the morning or the afternoon. So understanding this on a day-to-day kind of schedule is a great way to look at it. And we get that life is not rigid in the sense that you can't just make every single day the same, and we wouldn't want people to have that. That's not a great life. But having consistency and a bit of discipline throughout your life and trying to keep to it and turning negative micro habits into positive ones is a really good way to optimize your brain health.
Brilliant.
So you're building this cutting edge neurotech. So what's the biggest lessons you've learned about optimizing your brain?
There is no one size fits all, but two, the brain is an organ like others in the body, and that there are decisions that we can make in our life that impact its health, and that we're starting to be able to see how those decisions impact the brain. And that's exactly what we want to feedback is, here is your brain, here is how it's changing.
Brilliant. And we actually had a question from one of our community members. So we have a community of aspiring entrepreneurs, and she's actually a neuroscientist herself. And she has this question that I'm going to read out for you. So she says, her name's Yassi, so shout out Yassi. So she says, how close are we to being able to tune our brains like we choose a playlist on Spotify? Switching into deep focus mode for work in the morning, then relaxing at night. Is this a realistic future, or are we overestimating what brain tech can actually do?
We're not a million miles away from being able to modulate certain attributes of your brain. Why is that the case? Because we're seeing conversion of a number of capabilities and technologies which will enable us to do that. So we're seeing miniaturization of sensors, maturation of semiconductors to the point where we're able to do things like graphene technology, brain-computer interface. Sorry, that's all really technical stuff. And also power in how we're able to process information about what is an extremely complex signal, like source of signal, to the point where we are now getting closer and closer to be able to use all those technologies to mediate what the brain is doing. That's what Neuralink is, essentially.
Could you explain Neuralink? What's that?
Neuralink is essentially an invasive brain-computer interface. So it uses an implant inside the brain, which is basically stimulating the brain with an electronic signal in order at a specific area, point in time, in order to make the brain create a signal which then results in something. So I believe that they're currently focused on, actually don't know what their clinical use case is. I believe there's a lot of work on Parkinson's disease and neurodegenerative disorders, spinal cord injury as well. What we're really interested in is non-invasive brain-computer interface and also non-invasive neuromodulation and neurostimulation. And it's those things that I was telling you about earlier. Can you show the brain certain colors, images, sounds, text? Can you create an environment for the brain where the brain is happier, healthier, more focused, more performing? We're not super far away from being there. And there are interesting companies working in that space. And a lot of them are really focused on diseases, which they rightly should be. But we're really excited about how they can also improve the life of the everyday person who just wants to be better too.
Yeah. Brilliant. So this section is going to be called Could This Be a Unicorn? So hopefully it is. We hope to interview the next generation of unicorn founders. But a lot of our listeners are starting their own startups and they want to see if their startups are investable from a VC perspective. Yep. So we want to do a bit of a deep dive into your company, what VCs would ask you, just to see if it's viable from a VC perspective.
Sure.
So without further ado, what does the market look like for this sort of startup?
Yeah, what's interesting is that when you see real innovation and new technology, it's difficult to place in an existing market. So from a VC's perspective, I'll do your work for you, right? There are three main markets that this company can sit in. The neurotech market is worth about over $1 billion, 1.2 billion right now. The mental health market is worth, I think, maybe 10 or 12 billion. Yeah. And then you have things like neuropsychiatry and consumer and precision health as well. We're really sitting in between all three of these markets. And what we're seeing in all of those markets is that the CAGR, or compound annual growth rate of those markets, is really high, especially in neurotech. So you're seeing something like a 10 to 15% CAGR on neurotech. If you're a VC, a 10 to 15% CAGR is very attractive because it means that over time that market is growing like crazy. Basically, in order to be defined as a unicorn, you need to have a valuation of over $1 billion, right? That means on a multiple of an average of 4 or 5, you need to have a 200 million annual recurring revenue. We are easily modeling over the next kind of 5 to 10 years that a consumer business plus clinical interventions would easily put us into that category if we were well-funded and we did the right thing. So if you are a VC, please do invest in us and we'll be happy to have a conversation.
Brilliant. And how do you plan to monetize?
Yeah, it's like what I was just talking about there. There's two main sources of revenue generation. We, as a direct-to-consumer solution, so it will be that you, as an individual, you would pay out of pocket in order to go and undertake the routine that we've been describing, this preventative monitoring routine for your brain. At the closest analog to that would be something like Nico, right, where you pay out of pocket in that kind of range to go and do something like this. And then in the future, what we'll also do is, with the consent of our users, we'll use that data to develop new, very necessary clinical interventions that can really help people, because we believe that we need better solutions for neurological disorders and mental health conditions. And we will monetize via that as well, via a clinical validation route to market as well.
And I'm really curious, how would you get this to scale and get people actually going to check their brains? Even Nico Health, people still aren't going to get this whole full body MRI. It's still quite a novel habit to do that. So how are you going to encourage people to scan their brains regularly?
Yeah, we're going to do a couple of things in terms of tactical stuff. We're going to use like hyper localized influencer led growth. So basically, this is a location based business, so you'll have to be in a city where it's available to you. And then we'll use tactics that have worked for other companies, where we do really heavy and intense promotion within those specific locations. And then we'll also use like a franchisee model and partnership model, whereby it will be available in other places to scale very quickly. So basically, once we've developed the service, we will then be able to franchise that service out to longevity clinics, wellness clinics, aesthetic clinics all over the world, who can then be a Connectome affiliate center and then provide that service to the people that they have going through their doors. And I think that a lot of people would be interested in doing something like that, would be going to those places anyway. And I think that, that's a great way, I think, of getting this into the hands of as many people as possible.
Brilliant. And final question VCs always want to know is, why you guys?
Got some thoughts on you just heard Lucas there. He's somebody that really understands how we can take something like this to market, and it's a deeply complex startup in a way, so it's got multiple phases. So just being able to understand how we can phase things is super important. And from my side, I bring a deep expertise in neuroscience and a network in this space, connections with Imperial College and professors and things. We've got this real kind of differences in our skill sets that we can both use in different ways to help advance both the science and also the device within the market. And then also, it's coming back to the very beginning of our conversation, just both of our passion for this area. I think we're passionate for different reasons, but they both fuel us, and they fuel our kind of complete, just I'd say it's almost like an obsession with the idea of just really wanting to bring this out and get this to people as quickly as we can.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I would agree with that, and I think that obsession is the reason why we're still texting each other at 1 a.m. in the morning and saying goodnight. And that's the kind of thing that's kind of driving us.
You don't actually say goodnight.
It's
just
Yeah, I think we both have this really deep personal connection to the topic, and we have the right motivation in order to make it happen.
Yeah, so that's the end of that section. Shame I don't have any money, but I will. Okay, so we know entrepreneurs are really competitive by now. We're going to test your competitiveness. We're going to give you questions each.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll go from there. So, Aka, do you want to give the first one to Rufus?
Okay. Which part of the brain is responsible for decision-making and problem-solving? Oh, A, hippocampus, B, cerebellum, C, prefrontal cortex, or D, the amygdala?
Oh my God. I don't want to give another depends answer.
Yeah.
So executive function and decision-making is typically...
You have to answer one of the letters, Rufus. Does he have to answer?
He has to answer.
Yeah.
Can I do
One
all
of
of
the
the above?
Oh, could you?
What's the
nuance?
most right answer?
The most right, yeah. I guess
People typically say the prefrontal cortex.
Correct.
you're correct.
Yes.
So 1 point for Lucas. So 1 point for Rufus. Okay, cool. So the next question is for Lucas. We're starting off mild, but they're gonna get harder.
So I'll probably get it wrong now.
No, don't worry. What is the term for the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections? A, neuroplasticity, B, cyanogenesis, C, hemispheric dominance, or D, neurogenesis?
A, neuroplasticity.
Yay!
What condition is caused by the death of dopamine-producing neurons in the brain? Is it A, Alzheimer's disease, B, Parkinson's disease, C, epilepsy, or D, multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, it's B, Parkinson's disease.
Correct.
Yay! Okay, Lucas, this one's for you. Zoe, we know, is a health technology company. But what does Zoe mean in Greek? Is it A, light, B, life, C, wisdom, or D, strength?
Life, wisdom, or strength. Right, hang on, wait. I don't know, guys. I'm gonna go for wisdom.
Final answer?
No. Life.
Yay! Okay, 2 for 2. Yeah, brilliant. 3 for 3. Let's have both of you. This is why you should trust these founders. All right, so we're moving to the final section of the podcast, which is the reality. And we're just going to dig into, just to really understand and share your real insights about the good, bad, and ugly of being a founder and what you'd like to leave the audience with. So what do you wish you had known before starting this journey?
I wish I'd had university level education in intellectual property law.
Is that tough? Yeah, expand more.
I think it's something we never talk about it. Startup, you never hear people on podcasts like this talk about things like that.
Yeah.
It's such a big part of what you need to do, especially if you're working in real tech.
Is it protecting Connectome?
Especially right now, it's really hard to, as a pre-seed company in this kind of not super favorable environment, it's really hard to raise money on an idea right now, and investors are really looking for something to value you on. And it's harder than it used to be that a team and an idea is enough, and therefore you then have to lean on defensibility, and the only way of maintaining defensibility is through intellectual property. And so intellectual property is A, very complicated, and it's B, very expensive. It's even to get opinions on it, it's extremely expensive. To do things like freedom to operate searches can cost literally hundreds of thousands to millions just to look at what's out there. That is one of the bits that I like. Team stuff is obviously really hard, people stuff is hard, like a lot of the psychological stuff is really hard, but I don't think there are enough resources out there in terms of IP, and I think we could do better at helping each other out in that field too, because I do think it's a big part of what being a tech founder looks like.
Especially a science tech founder.
Exactly.
And
so are there any sacrifices that you had to make along the way to be where you are today?
I think, and this ties in a little bit with the previous question, not the answer, but just in terms of creating a startup. We've mentioned it a few times that there's this obsession, and essentially it becomes something that really dominates your thinking throughout your entire day, throughout your entire week. And literally from the instance of waking up, you're thinking about it till when you go to bed. And then I very often wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and write down a few ideas. So
I thought that was just me.
Yeah. And I think it's something that there's this excitement, and there's also this drive to get this kind of out there as quickly as you can, and to beat others out there as well. So a bit of competition as well. As we've established, we're competitive people. But I think something which we're trying to really instill within the company is this kind of people first kind of mentality, and relationships first mentality as well. So it's all about noticing that, yes, there's this excitement to constantly just go, but at the same time, you've got to sometimes take a step back and say, okay, make sure that you've still got that balance, because there's people that are supporting you through this, and you've got to make sure that they are included in your thinking, and that you don't just allow yourself to just get completely lost to it. And typically what I found at least is when you do step back, you actually come back energized and with more focus, and you can get more done in the time that you do have. So I think promoting that balance between ourselves as co-founders, and still pushing each other a bit, but promoting that balance and promoting it within our team, and creating a culture from the start that focuses on that is paramount. And I think that's a lesson that we're learning now in real time.
Fantastic. And where can people learn more about Connectome Health?
You can find more about Connectome Health at www.connectome.health. Our waitlist is open. We'd love to have you sign up, and we'd love to also have you enroll on our trials in both London and Zurich. You can also reach out to us as co-founders, as we'd love to be in touch with potential users, and always love to get feedback from customers as well.
So what's one thought you'd like to leave the audience with?
That healthcare is a journey, and that it's the sort of habits you build up over your life that really contribute towards how you're going to spend, first of all, your time in that space, but also your life.
So that brings us on to the end of the podcast. Weren't Lucas and Rufus amazing? So we're building something super cool. All the links and studies they shared are going to be linked below. So please follow and subscribe to hear more about Nova and Boba and Connectome Health. Thank you.